So now I'm going to call up our first state agency panel. Just as a reminder, there is coffee in the back of the room. The restrooms are to the right. We're not taking an official break. We're very happy to have the 4 state leaders whose agencies are involved with workforce development joining us today. I'm going to let Juan put their little tent cards out while I introduce them. Yes, I have water bottles too. So I'm going to briefly introduce each of them and ask them to explain their agency's role in providing workforce development services, and particularly for lower skilled Rhode Islanders. And then I'll follow up with some questions, and we'll also save time for questions from the audience as well. So write those down, remember them. You should have pad and pencils on your desk, and then we will be sure to grill them with hard questions. So if you guys would like to come on up and take your seats. We're not really, I'm sorry, I'm just kidding. Don't get nervous.
I'm going to grill us.
So first we have Heather Hudson, who serves as the Executive Director of the Governor's Workforce Board of Rhode Island since January of 2017. For those of you who aren't familiar with the name, the Governor's Workforce Board, it is a policy-making body with statutory responsibility and authority to plan, coordinate, fund, and evaluate workforce development activities that support strategies to improve the existing skill base of Rhode Island's workforce and to anticipate the future needs of the business. So they really evaluate the systems and help fund many of the programs in this room. The board consists of 21 members representing business, labor, education, community, and government who establish workforce development policy and plans and allocate state job development funds. So welcome, Heather. We also have Commissioner Ken Wagner, who has served as the Commissioner of Rhode Island Department of Elementary and Secondary Education since July of 2015. In addition to providing leadership on elementary and secondary education, many people don't know that Ken is also responsible for the adult education system here in Rhode Island. So thank you for joining us, Commissioner Wagner. Director Courtney Hawkins has served as the Director of the Rhode Island Department of Human Services since July of 2017. And in that role, she administers work support programs and is also responsible for the workforce development programs for parents receiving cash assistance and for those adults receiving SNAP benefits. So welcome, Courtney, Director Hawkins. And then last but not least, Commissioner Dr. Brenda Dann-Messier was appointed Commissioner of Post-Secondary Education in August of 2017. And as Commissioner, she's responsible for ensuring our state has a high quality and affordable post-secondary education system. And she's leading the effort that Andy mentioned to implement the governor's goal for post-secondary attainment in Rhode Island, which is that by 2025, 70% of Rhode Islanders will have a post-secondary credential. So welcome all of you. And Heather, we'll start with you to tell us a little bit about your agency.
Okay. It's on? Great. Good morning. Thank you for having me. Good morning to everybody.
Good morning.
Hope you got your second round of coffee. So I'm the Executive Director of the Governor's Workforce Board. Just by show of hands, how many of you are familiar with the Governor's Workforce Board? Wonderful. That means you've checked out our new website, you're following us on Twitter. I've only been in this position just over a year, so I can tell you a little bit about the work that we do, which is actually very simple. But what I want you to take away from the 2 minutes that I'm going to talk is how complex the workforce is. So the Governor's Workforce Board, again, we have a board, governor appointed. It's actually a state and a federal statute that the Governor's Workforce Board exists. So everything that Andy was talking about, all those other states have a workforce board. But Rhode Island is unique in that we also have the job development fund that we invest in. And we have all of the amazing people that I'm sitting up here with today and all of you in the room that do that work. So we do 2 things at the Governor's Workforce Board. We invest, and we lead, and we coordinate. So we invest in workforce training programs to help people get jobs, to help people build their career pathways, and to build talent pipelines, all in response to what employers need and our industry need here in the state. And then we coordinate. I work with Commissioner Wagner, I work with Commissioner Brenda Dann-Messier, and I'm working with Director Courtney Hawkins and so many other people here in this room every day. Some days I get back to the office, I'm like, I don't even know what I did today, but I talk to everybody. So that's how I know that I'm out there, because especially in the state of Rhode Island, it is helpful to be able to talk to everybody on a weekly basis and know exactly what my partner is doing across the street. The thing about workforce that I want everybody to know, there's this myth that I think that if you go to DLT, you're gonna be able to get a job, or you're gonna find a training, or we have a lot of people that come to us and say, hey, yeah, we really wanna talk to this employer. It doesn't work like that. There's this myth that there's a button that the Department of Labor and Training can push, and all of a sudden workforce happens and jobs happen. Workforce is a network. It means working with our K through 12 schools, our CT schools, our colleges, all of the community-based organizations in the room that are constantly getting people every day coming to them and saying, I need help, I need a job, I lost my job, or I just moved here and I need to connect. So every day is less about the governor's workforce board or the DLT managing one particular program or administering one particular program. If any of you know about WIOA, that's millions of federal dollars that come down to the state of Rhode Island and cross our 2 local workforce boards and cross multiple agencies. And so that side of workforce is incredibly complex. And so if you want the 101 on workforce, I'm happy to give it to you. But what would be even better is if you could just tell me, how do you fit into that workforce? Are you helping our students in K through 12? Are you trying to get them education and skills and building that talent pipeline early? Are you focused on helping middle skilled adults who maybe have been disconnected, lost their job, are trying to figure out what their next step is, access additional resources, get into college, finish college, reconnect with college because they had a bad experience? Are you an employer who just needs to fill jobs? That's every day we're hearing from employers, talking to CVS, talking to citizens, trying to figure out what we can do to better be responsive to help fill those jobs that our employers in Rhode Island need right now. I'll get into all of the other programs that we fund. I'm happy to answer those questions. I do want to talk about those programs, but the main thing that I wanted to say in my opening remarks was, it's really not me, it's not my board, it's not the Department of Labor and Training alone. The workforce is a complete complex spider web of everybody here in this room, and so if you don't know the people on the panel with us today, or with me today, if you don't know the other people in the room, that's the best way. If you don't know the local workforce boards, go find your local workforce board. We have to talk to each other and work together, because I'm not going to do it alone. It's a network in workforce, and we work to bring everybody together and coordinate and lead. And so some of the programs and the investments that we're making are doing that. As you heard from everybody, Real Jobs Rhode Island alone has gotten thousands of people jobs and training. Significant increase in what we've seen over the past few years. And that's new and that's exciting, but we got to keep it going, and we got to make sure people know about it and that people know how to get into the program. So I'll stop there.
Great. Thanks, Heather. You did, yes. Great job. Commissioner Dann-Messier, do you want to go next?
Certainly. Good morning, everybody. First, I really just want to applaud Economic Progress Institute's decades of work and analysis and advocacy. Linda and Rachel, you're such a vital resource to the state of Rhode Island, so thank you very much for all the work you have done and continue to do on behalf of all of us in Rhode Island.
Thank you.
I also want to thank my friend and colleague Andy Van Clunen for coming from Washington and for his national leadership, and really for all the great work that you do working with states to help build strong coalitions. It's really important work, and come back to Rhode Island anytime you want. We like having you here, so thank you very much. I'm the post-secondary commissioner, and that means that I develop and implement higher education policy in partnership with our 3 public institutions of higher education on behalf of our Council of Post-Secondary Education. And we have 6 key priorities. The most important one for our office, and really the organizing framework for our work, is our 70 by 25 goal that Rachel and Andy and others have mentioned, And that is the goal that the governor set that states that 70% of all Rhode Islanders by 2025 must have some post-high school certifications, degrees, and credentials in order to fully compete in today's economy. And why was that goal so high? And it is high compared to many other states because, as Andy mentioned, 70% of the jobs by 2020 are going to require post-secondary certifications and degrees. And so we want to make sure as a state that we have the skilled workforce that will enable our economy to continue to grow and develop. So that's our top key priority for our office, and I'll talk more broadly about the role that you all can play in helping to achieve that goal. It is very ambitious and very bold, but doable. We will reach it if we have very targeted strategies. Our second key priority is making sure that we close equity gaps, and I'll talk further around the goal and where we are right now. We're at 47%, which is the national average. We're making some progress. We were 43% a couple of years ago. So we're moving in the right direction, but we're going to have to move even more quickly in the future. But then if you disaggregate that data by subgroups, you'll see that only 20% of Latinos have that attainment level, 30% of African Americans, and that's unacceptable. And so we have to work very hard to close equity gaps. Our third priority is to make college more affordable. And Greg Smiley and Andy talked about the College Promise program, and that's a very important part of the affordability agenda. And yes, we would love to have an adult promise program in Rhode Island, and we're working very hard to make that happen. But that's only a piece of that work, making college more affordable. One of the pieces of work that we're going to do with Gabrielle Andino on our staff, who's our legislative policy specialist, is to have in place state financial aid policies that support all students. And so we're working very hard to put those policies together for the next legislative session. Our fourth key priority is to make sure that we are increasing the number of graduates from our higher education system in high growth, high demand sectors. And so that's also work that you're undertaking. The two others are just to make sure that our system is focused on innovation and effectiveness. And I can speak specifically about making sure that we have accelerated pathways for immigrant professionals, for veterans, that we're articulating the work for registered apprentices that Andy talked about into college credit, et cetera. And then our last priority is why I'm here with all of my colleagues, is that we can only, as Heather mentioned, we can't do this work alone. We really are most effective when we're working across government. And I love that my colleague, Commissioner Wagner, says all the time that our 70 by 25 goal is his goal for his agency as well. And I, in turn, say his third grade reading goal, making sure that all third graders are reading at grade level, is also our goal. So that's the kind of partnership we have, and that's very important for us and very intentional for us to align our work. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Director Hawkins, would you like to go? We'll go ladies first today.
Good morning. What a great crowd. It's good to see so many familiar faces. Thanks for having me. So I wanted to start by acknowledging that when Rachel introduced the panel, she said that there were going to be leaders from 4 workforce development agencies for the state. And on the list of crazy things that people say to you when you're the DHS director, it's, well, why are you here? We're talking about workforce development. So I appreciate the acknowledgement of that. I know folks in this room know that, but I'll say that outside of this room, people often don't get it, right? And I think part of what we need to do is reframe the conversation and reframe my department so that people understand that it's also not just about the fact that we fund Rhode Island Works and SNAP ENT and specific workforce programs, but that we represent the supply, right? If we're going to change, if we're going to help 1 in 8 families who are living in poverty in Rhode Island change their lives, the voice of the folks that we serve has to be at the table. And we have to ensure that the workforce programming that we're developing is the programming that the folks that come to a DHS office are the programs are the programs that they need. So I know you all know that, but I appreciate the opportunity to start by acknowledging it. I also wanted to share a little bit about my vision for the department. I think I'm around 10 months now here, so some of you may have heard this, but I think it's also important that we start to reframe for the state that DHS is not about eligibility determination of benefits. It is often what people focus the most on. It is often what I am held accountable for. I look forward to the day when I am held accountable for the long-term outcomes of the people that we serve and not my ability to administer SNAP for them. We have to focus on it now in particular because we have some work to do there and we've made a lot of progress, but in the long term, we should be talking about long-term outcomes for families, long-term outcomes for vulnerable individuals, and we have to think about how we use the interaction at DHS as the point of engagement for folks and the point of connection to other departments. And it's great to hear everyone talk about our collaborations, and I am so grateful to be part of a cabinet that has folks like the people that are sitting at this table to work with, and my job is to push these departments to ensure that the programs that are being developed are the programs that DHS customers actually need, and so we will continue to do that. I also wanted to acknowledge that if I want to create an environment and a place where we are the connection point, then I have to change the experience for DHS customers, and I think it's really important that folks hear me say that I'm often deeply dissatisfied by what our customers have to experience to be able to access benefits in our programs. My staff are amazing, and the work that they do every day leaves me in awe. And it's my job to push us to think about how we can make access to benefits and the work that my staff do easier, and to pull down the barriers. I mean, when Andy talks about thinking through the policies that well-meaning people implement, it is our job to look hard at our policies and think about what those policies are actually resulting in for the people that we serve and push ourselves to change them. That's a steep hill to climb, but it's why I'm here and it's why I'm grateful to have this opportunity, and it's going to be slow progress, but ensuring that we aren't creating unintentional barriers, that you don't have to wait in line for hours, that you don't have to wait on the phone for hours, that when you meet with someone, they have the opportunity to give you the information that you need to get access to programs that you're looking for. That's the real long-term vision, and so I'm really excited, a year from now to be back here not talking about eligibility determination and talking about how we're moving the department in that direction. I also quickly wanted to acknowledge that we're talking a lot about multi-generational approaches. You're supposed to call them whole family now. You're not allowed to call them 2-gen. It's all the same, but thinking about how we're working across generations of folks to change the trajectory of a family's life is really exciting work, and I'm so grateful to be in a state that has really thoughtful people who come to me on my first day and say, here is a list of things that we know are going to work. Can you help us to accomplish them? So that's been really reassuring. The last thing I want to say is something I try to say in every room that I get the opportunity to speak in, which is having goals that families have access to careers is really important. But if people don't reliably have food and housing and access to childcare, they cannot work. And it is really important that you all know that I need you to carry that message to everyone you talk to. Because on the list of crazy things people say to me, it is frequent that people do not make the connection that if you are hungry, or you don't have health care, or you don't have housing, or you don't have childcare, you should just go to work. And so we really have to kind of beat that drum for folks so that they understand that it's not one or the other, and that these foundational services for people are actually going to be the thing that makes the real difference in our state. I was really proud of the governor and the state of the state when she said we will not leave anyone behind in the recovery. If we're going to do that, we need to make sure that people have access to all of the critical programs that they need so that they can take their next step. So, thank you.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. One of the questions that came up in my intro is, well, why ride? Why does adult ed sit and ride? And in some ways, it's just a legacy of the current statute, which places it in ride. But in some ways, it really doesn't matter where it officially sits, because if we don't work together, none of us would be successful. I think of this work as continuing what we started, And that's a bit of a rip-off from Tennessee's finish what we started, but I dropped the finish because we'll never be finished. All of our learners will continue if they're successful in the economy and if they're successful in providing for their families in the way that they aspire to. They'll have to continue to be learners, and we'll have to continue to support them to be learners. So we continue some really important work in the K-12 setting, but we don't start it there. Families and communities start teaching kids. We keep it going in K-12. Brenda keeps it going in higher ed. Courtney keeps it going by supporting people and families, and Heather keeps us all honest by focusing on where they're heading. So that we have to work together. I need to work with Brenda on attainment. I need to work with Heather on alignment. I need to work with Courtney on the people. Let me just highlight some things that we know don't work, and then the converse will give a flavor of where we're trying to go. Scott Jensen always talks about what doesn't work is the idea that you train over here and you work over there. That just doesn't work, because often there's just a huge disconnect between what we're training people for and what they actually need to do in the world of work. So it has to be integrated. It has to be, for example, the Washington IBEST model, where you're integrating the efforts of the academic learning, the post-secondary readiness with the job skills that we need to do. Aligned to that is this idea that in education, in public services, we often focus on supply. That often doesn't work. We can't just produce supply without consideration of alignment to demand. And we also need to not only watch demand, but also seed demand when it makes sense. For example, we can't grow our economy by trying to seed demand in the jobs that used to be. We need to seed demand in the jobs that are going to be and the jobs we want to be focused on. We also know that this idea of one size fits all just doesn't work. We need to be focused on pathways, and pathways need to be focused on meeting people where they are. Doesn't matter whether you're meeting a young person where they are or you're meeting a bigger person where they are. You need to meet people where they are. You need to pay attention to their strengths, their interests, their passions, and then you need to help them forge a pathway for how to move forward. We also know that remediation doesn't work. We haven't quite absorbed that message, but this idea of taking people who have deficient, and I use that word deliberately with that emphasis, deficient skills, and put them over there, staple them to a chair, have lower expectations, and try to get them to adequate proficiencies, adequate level of skills, just doesn't work, because as soon as you identify someone for a separate service called remediation, a whole network of things that are designed to not produce success have started to go into place, including lower expectations, including a different set of supports, including lower morale, lower sets of hope and aspiration. So what we need to do is not put people with lack of skills over there, but you need to put people with growing skills into challenging environments. You need to pay attention to context. It needs to be aligned to interests, aspirations, and strengths, and you need to provide them with those supports. So get away from the deficit model and move toward the assets model. And then finally, I'll mention that we know that a sole service provider model doesn't work. We know that having a single sole service provider doesn't work. What we need to have is what we largely have here in Rhode Island, is an ecosystem of providers, lots of different providers, each provider being held accountable for results, each provider focusing on what they're most expertise in. Mixed delivery model, because people learn differently, and on-ramps and off-ramps. This is what Scott talks about all the time in workforce development. It's what we brought into K-12. It's what we need to bring into teacher ongoing professional learning. Ecosystem or provider, mixed delivery model, on-ramps, off-ramps, because what people need will always change, the context matters, and people will always need something. So we need to have a continuous service model. We're doing lots of great work in adult ed right now. We have the largest measurable improvement in New England, which is no small shakes. We need to be proud of that. We had a 2 times year-over-year increase in credentials, whether it be a GED credential or an other industry credential. Again, no small shakes. We need to be proud of that. And we're going to keep it going. We're going to keep it going. We have an RFP that just closed yesterday. It looks like we have lots of exciting proposals, really exciting proposals that really pick up on our call to action to integrate post-secondary opportunities and readiness with academic learning, whether it be literacy or second language acquisition or any other kind of academic learning, with partnerships with our dedicated employers here in Rhode Island. And then finally, we had a bit of a mess that we had to close up, which was that in our K-12 system, we have compulsory attendance through age 18, but at 16, students are able to do something called an alternate learning plan. And that alternate learning plan needs to be approved by various parties, including the superintendent. We had a bit of a mess that was happening, and that parents were being told that in order to get that kind of plan that was unique to their child or their student's needs, the parents had to sign off on various rights, including the parents were being told that they had to pay for those services, which of course is unconscionable, and I would have just said it was an oversight, except when we said it was unconscionable, when we said you can't do it anymore, the decision was appealed. Why that would happen, I have no idea. But that decision on appeal was just affirmed Tuesday night. We're working with service providers as well as local school districts to update our guidance and make clear not only the aspirations and the directions that we need to go for alternate learning for our K-12 youth or adult education providers, but be crystal clear that when school districts get money for their learners, those monies follow the students, including when those students go into alternate learning plans between the age of 16 and 18. We look forward to continuing this work and doing it together.
Thank you. Great, thank you. So I do want to leave time for questions from all of you, but I'm going to ask at least one of the panel. So Commissioner Dann-Messier, let's start with you. Looking at the disparities that I pointed out in my slides around educational attainment and median wages between white Rhode Islanders and workers of color or students of color, can you talk a little bit about how the 70 by 2025 attainment goal addresses those disparities?
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, we've disaggregated the data also and unearthed those unacceptable equity gaps. And so what we're doing right now, we have announced the goal, and we've announced a broad framework for our attainment goal, but we are in the process of developing targeted strategies to populate our attainment plan. And I need everybody's help in here to identify what those strategies might be. We have engaged in a contract with the University of Southern California Center for Urban Education. They're equity specialists, and they're going to help us to identify where we want to go. I'm thinking that I'd love to work with my colleagues across government, because it's not only in our system. Ken also has huge equity gaps in his system as well in terms of success rates, that we should set a statewide equity goal, quite frankly, and hold ourselves accountable for that goal. But we in the post-secondary system right now are working on developing targeted strategies. And two of the ways that we're also making sure that we're hearing from the right folks is we've established a community advisory board and council that will help inform us as we're developing our plan and keep us honest and on track for our goal. And we also have set up a student advisory council to make sure that we're hearing the student's voice in this effort. It's a long-term effort, but we're not going to achieve success as a state if we leave anybody behind, and we're deeply committed to closing equity gaps.
Great. Would anybody else like to address promising practices or goals you have in place in terms of addressing inequities of educational attainment? Heather?
I would. So as Andy kind of mentioned earlier, when the governor came into office, our first main strategy was building sector partnerships with our industry and smaller employers in the state of Rhode Island through Real Jobs Rhode Island. That program alone has served over 2,500 people. Over 1,600 people have gotten jobs. That's great. That is amazing. We know that we're serving a diverse group of people. We're serving throughout the state in various different regions. But when I came into the role, I had some serious conversations about making sure those folks who were maybe not quite ready for the Real Jobs training program could almost get a pre-apprenticeship type entry level into those training programs. And so we created Real Pathways. So Real Pathways is just almost a year old, but we've already placed 200 people into jobs. We have several of our Real Pathway partners here in the room today, and I just want to give a big shout out that they've been doing tremendous work. The idea of Real Pathways is that it's still connected with industry. And so one great example is we've recently been working with Brenda. The governor has put into her budget proposal to create a Northern Higher Ed Center. We've done this down in Westerly with Electric Boat. Now we have a handful of companies up in Northern Rhode Island who are interested in replicating that model. One of those companies is CVS. That company has told us specifically that they would like to work with developmental disabilities, folks with developmental disabilities. So turns out we have a Real Pathways partnership that has already been working to get folks with developmental disabilities jobs, so now we have a pipeline for that. I was just talking with somebody the other day about our ex-offender population. I was talking about our veterans population. The defense industry wants to hire more vets. We have a pipeline for that now. And so that's one way that we are addressing the equity gap. We know with our Real Pathways partnership program, 42% of the participants are Latino. 22% of the participants are African American. And so that's just within almost 1 year. We anticipate increasing the investment for this, hopefully when the governor's budget passes and we get increased funding. We'd like to continue supporting Real Pathways and Real Jobs so that those two can work together. So that's one way kind of on the workforce side we're addressing the equity.
Great. Yes.
Just to add one thing, and it happens all the time. This panel doesn't look like the communities we serve. This audience doesn't look like the communities we serve. Our teacher workforce doesn't look like the communities we serve. We have to have a strategy for that. What Heather just outlined is the beginnings of a strategy. But it's so pervasive. It's how we greet and welcome families into our schools. It's how we address issues of suspension and discipline in schools. It's really hard to convince a student to consider a lifetime of supporting public education when they've been systematically excluded from their schools through patterns of suspension that have disparate impact. So we need to have a comprehensive strategy. We've just introduced, for example, some work for students around a teaching pathway to try to encourage more students to become the most important job in the world, a teacher. We just now are in the middle of some regulatory changes to help identify cultural competence as a shortage area in our teacher workforce. So then we can use those shortage area flexibilities to get more cultural competence into our schools. But we need very comprehensive supports that needs to start with not just the tangible but the intangible, because people feel the intangible and it absolutely holds us all back.
So, Director, do you want to speak to this again? So I'd love to get to your questions. I think Juan has a microphone as well. It looks like we have one in the back of the room.
Hi, everybody. My name is Gabriela Domensain. I'm the new director of the Latino Policy Institute. So hi. Obviously, a lot of mention about discrepancies and disparities, especially with Latinos. I want to ask a question to all of you about your approach to this population. Commissioner, you just mentioned something that's glaringly obvious, which is that diversity in all of Rhode Island government is dismal, especially considering that we have 15 to 20% of the population being Latino, and obviously a lot of majority-minority urban districts. The data is out there and has been out there since way before I arrived. For those of you who don't know me, I arrived here 8 months ago. A Latino student in Rhode Island has the worst chance of succeeding in the nation. In the nation. So my question, as somebody who has focused her career on reaching this community, advocating for it in media, in politics, etc., is what is your approach to the community as a whole and as a structure of your organization? In my experience, unless there is a high-level person reporting directly to the top of an organization about the specific needs of underserved communities and sees all conversations through that lens in order to inform all of the work of an organization, nothing changes. And so I'm wondering what your approach is. At what point does the trigger in the data and in the work that you're doing happen that says, oh, And for Hispanics, this is how it's happening. And for African Americans, this is what is happening. At what point do you start thinking about how your approaches affect the most underserved, ignored, marginalized communities? Thank you.
Director Hawkins, you want to go first since you didn't answer before?
So, thank you for that. So the first thing I'll say is I feel like it is my responsibility to ask those questions every time I'm in a room where people are talking about those communities. So for example, I was in a room of folks talking about how are we going to, as a children's cabinet, deal with the outcomes that we're seeing for Latino children in our state, and everyone's talking about education, workforce, and all these things. No one's talking about poverty, right? No one's talking about the fact that Latino families are living in poverty at an extraordinary rate as compared to their white counterparts, right? Until, as a state, we're willing to understand what I said before, which is that there is no success if we don't provide people with their basic needs, I don't think we will move the needle. So my staff every day are faced with trying to help families and do the best they can, but Linda Katz, who is, quickly become my mentor, reminded me this week, she showed me a graph, the state of Rhode Island has not increased the dollar amount that we give to families on cash assistance since 1978. It's $500 a month for a family of 3. It's outrageous, right? So if we want to change this, we have to be willing to make investments in families to ensure that they have their basic needs met. So that's one piece. The other thing I'll say to you is that, I know that when you run a department like mine, people believe that you can have low expectations for the kinds of experiences families and people should have when they interact with their department. And what I tried to allude to before is that I do not accept that. Families and people served by DHS should hold me to a standard that is the same standard that people served by the DMV hold them to, and ensuring that we remove barriers so that it is easier for families and individuals to have access to the benefits they need is really critical if we're going to move the needle.
So I think having the data is very important, and publicly reporting progress or the lack thereof and holding ourselves accountable is extremely important. And we, as part of our attainment goal, we will twice a year have a public dashboard that shows how successful or unsuccessful our students are, and it will be disaggregated by race and ethnicity.
Part of our job of leadership is to shift the narrative, which starts, of course, with asking the right questions. And we have had agency-wide conversations about using race and equity as a frame for every significant policy decision, to just have a protocol to ask the questions in a structured way about how would this major policy question have an impact on issues of race and equity. But also, I have a responsibility publicly to shift narratives that, quite frankly, are anchored in the opposite of equity. So, for example, I've spent a lot of time consistently for 3 years trying to shift the narrative around second language acquisition being a deficiency, a deficit, something that drains us. It's the exact opposite. It's a strength, it's an asset, it's something that grows us, makes us stronger. I'm the deficient one because I'm not acquiring a second language. And then going the next level to say, well, concretely, how could that benefit all families? Well, dual language programs are one of the most powerful ways to teach kids, where kids who are native English struggle in the morning because they're learning in Portuguese, Mandarin, or Spanish, and students who are not native English struggle in the afternoon because they're learning in English, where everybody struggles side by side and everybody grows. And now I'm getting lots of crazy looks about this cultural competence thing. And the question that I ask people, is cultural competence a thing? Well, yeah. Is it important? Well, yeah. Can we measure it? Well, I think we can. We're trying to figure that out, and there's a lot of folks nationally who are going to help us do that. So if it's a thing, if it's important and it's measurable, why would we treat it any differently than science? Why would we treat it any differently than math? And it's one of those things that if you position the narrative right, there really is not a good answer other than it just makes me uncomfortable. So we have to push those kinds of conversations.
Great. Did you want to speak?
Can I respond really quickly?
Sure.
So two ways, I think, from the GWB and the DLT perspective. One is resources. So we have invested our resources into, as I mentioned, real jobs partners and real pathway partners that know the community, our community leaders. We're directing our funds towards those partnerships, and we are also trying to make our funds more flexible. We understand that a lot of federal resources have very strict eligibility requirements, process, reporting, monitoring requirements. We have the ability to make those funds flexible to kind of fill in the gaps, to provide a stipend for individuals, to pay off a parking ticket, for example. Like, we can do that. We then, on the second part of this, is try and hold that work accountable and hold ourselves accountable. And so not only are we working on creating more of a longitudinal database, longitudinal dashboard with DataSpark for building off of the database, but we're also doing internal active contract management with support from Harvard Kennedy School to disaggregate the data and then look at it in terms of both our real jobs partners and our real pathway partners to see over time, okay, so for example, one of our real jobs partners is serving a ton of people, but when we look into it a little bit more, we see there's certain partnerships that are doing a better job of serving certain individuals more than others, more men than others, more white people than others, and so then we can have those conversations and hold them accountable for figuring out through real pathways, creating and tying those pipelines in. So I would say it's both the resources and the accountability piece for us.
Great. I think we have another question here in the back.
Hi, my name is Liz Gledhill. I'm on the South Kingstown Town Council. I really appreciate that you have somebody from DHS on this panel because I think a big part of what's missing from the conversation about jobs is affordable housing. In South Kingstown specifically, we kind of have a crisis and a shortage of affordable housing, and over 60% of the workforce in South Kingstown doesn't live in South Kingstown, despite having the largest employer in the state, URI, within our community. So I'm just wondering, where does affordable housing fit in your conversation as one of the basic human needs that we need to meet? Because we could create jobs all day long, but if we can't bring people here that can afford to live here, it's not really for anything.
Yeah, thank you for that. So interestingly, in the state of Rhode Island, most of the housing policy lives in Commerce. And so while it is a challenge for most of the folks we're serving, one of the challenges we face as a state is a lack of coordination around both affordable housing policy and also what is our strategy for individuals who are homeless. And so the governor this year in her budget proposal has committed to creating a senior deputy secretary position that will have a role to coordinate housing policy and homelessness prevention policy across state departments, because what you learn when you come into government is that anytime a problem touches multiple departments, we do it terribly, right? And so having a single source of accountability who is going to help us work together to be better, I think is the starting point there. And then figuring out how we're going to use our funding to actually move the needle and have, it's not about affordable housing or homelessness prevention, it's about both. And quickly the dynamic in the state has become it has to be one or the other. I think providing leadership to say we need a strategy for both, because until we deal with both, we won't move forward, is the starting point.
I think we have a question in the back.
There's one over here also.
Okay, thanks.
Hello, my name is
Go ahead,
My
sorry.
name is Don Gregory. I'm an adult educator here at the Providence Public Library with Carissa, who spoke earlier. We have a lot of on-ramp programs that we transition adults across into jobs or post-secondary. One of the things that I see every day when I'm teaching is that we have a target of 70% to get people, and the big barrier that no one really has mentioned today is money. And there are a lot of people that want to go to college that are transitioning from the job that they're in, but they can't afford it. They're deathly afraid of taking on a student loan. So my question comes from one of my colleagues is from Tech High, always says to put mastery before pedigree. Now, I have degrees, but all these job postings I see, I see must have a bachelor's degree, must have a master's degree. Some of them need that, but many of them don't. Are we talking to our employers to put mastery in front of pedigree in certain job industries?
All right, I'll take a stab first, and then I'm going to hand it off to the commissioner. So we are having that conversation. I mean, TechHire is doing a phenomenal job of working with our companies, specifically within the tech industry, to help them see that it's a really more of a skills-based economy and a skills approach. Right now, it's an employer's market, right? Their unemployment rate is so low that they are picking and choosing, and they've gotten a major influx of people. I do think it's so funny. I mean, we actually have so many employers that don't care often, and in the manufacturing industry is one in particular. Oftentimes, they just want a good person that's going to show up every day on time and like be excited about that work. So there are jobs out there that don't require the bachelor's degree, but they do require on-the-job training, some sort of industry credential or certification, and that's why these apprenticeship models, contextualized based education, where we're taking adult providers but adding on a layer of those industry expertise. Manufacturing companies always say to me, like, we just want somebody that like knows our space. They want them to be able to walk into a room and know what the name of that machine is, have an understanding of the way process works. So we are having that conversation all the time with employers. Oftentimes they're the ones coming to us saying, we don't even care, we want good people. So then sometimes you get down the road and then they're like, oh, well, I guess we do need these certifications, but that's not usually where they start. Now, it is different with some jobs and some companies. So I'll stop there and let the commissioner respond.
So I'm going to answer in a number of different ways, but before I go in, I just wanted to recognize Amy Grabowski. We've talked a lot today about the Wesley Education Center, and people need to know who's leading that stellar effort. You're absolutely right that there are many employers who, what I call have credential creep, and think you only can have a 4-year degree in order to be successful. And the message that I like to share with employers is exactly what Heather talked about, that there's a wide range of skills and abilities and credentials that are as valuable as a 4-year degree. And so I think all of us have to engage in that discussion. It can't just be us doing that. You also have to really talk about that it is the skills and competencies that an employee brings to the job that will enable them to be successful. And one of the pieces of the attainment goal that we're really stressing is we're not focusing on just the attainment of a 4-year degree or even an associate's degree, but post-high school certifications and credentials. And they will be counted, they will be part of our dashboard. But it's an all-hands-on-deck discussion that you've got to have with employers. Another piece of how we can have that discussion with employers, I think, is around there are many large employers that have tuition reimbursement policies. And Andy mentioned that so many employers really provide opportunities for the higher level folks. And so we're beginning to do an analysis of the employers in Rhode Island who have tuition reimbursement policies and have a large number of low-skilled employers. But talking to the employers to say a tuition reimbursement policy for a low-wage worker is difficult because they have to put the money up front and get reimbursed. And so again, these are some of the policy discussions we're having, and we're actually working in concert with Department of Labor and Training and Heather's office to figure out if there are different strategies so low-skilled workers do not have to put money up front, that there would be some other entity that would do that, and then their employer would reimburse that other entity. But it's a very broad-based problem on multiple fronts, and we are trying to tackle it as best we can, but we need all your help.
I have to add one more thing really quickly, which is this idea of incumbent worker training. So where's Jill Holloway? There she is. So we have a Real Pathways partnership with some of Jill's leadership to provide ESL at companies on the job who have individuals who are already working there but need that additional help. We also provide incumbent worker training grants through Real Jobs that people are getting college credit for free through Real Jobs Rhode Island and some of our Real Jobs partnerships. So There's many ways that we're tackling this, and I think part of it is we maybe can do a better job of helping explain that, but thank you.
Just add a quick thing. The whole bachelor's degree thing is, in some ways, it's a proxy, and HR folks use it as a proxy. Sometimes it's just a proxy for laziness, because a bachelor's degree just brings a lot of things that then they can think that they can just assume. Sometimes it's a proxy for discriminatory behavior. And sometimes it's a proxy because they're confused about what the other kinds of credentials that are available that would mean something that they could trust are. And I would suggest as a field, we need to help HR folks understand what the range of credentials are, what they mean, and make sure that if we get behind a credential, it actually has a meaning that we can stand by. Otherwise, people just default back to what they're comfortable with, and they use proxies like bachelor's degrees.
So I know we're over time for this panel, but we have one burning question on the side, if you guys will.
Hi, my question is about gender. So we talk a lot about racial equity, which I'm totally down for, but also furthering how we're breaking down and looking at the implications of our overall strategy of how we're thinking about, especially women of color. If we are the backbone of families and what we have seen internationally in this country about when you focus in on women of color, it helps leverage people families out of poverty. But I haven't heard any specific strategy work that's being done that focuses in on women. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Anybody like to take that question? It's a tough one.
We'll let the man talk first.
Go, Ken, go.
I'm sorry. Just quick examples. So in the K-12 space, we're launching some career pathways work, and we're very conscious at the design phase that if we don't have a strategy at the beginning around equity, including gender equity, we're just going to perpetuate the same structural problems that we've had with all of our other strategies. So with career pathways, for example, we put out equity grants to help school districts and to prompt school districts to, as they're making these opportunities available, STEM opportunities, for example, to make sure that they serve traditionally underserved groups of students, including girls. And that segues into our computer science for all work. In 2 years, we scaled up computer science offerings in all of our schools across the state. Now we have some serious work to do around quality of that work. That is one of the biggest gaps that we have between boys and girls is access to these high-tech, flexible, high-paying jobs like computer science. And right there in that initiative, we have specific strategies around girls who code, those kinds of things. So those are just two anecdotes that don't nearly get at the range of comprehensive things that we need to do, but just to give a flavor of the kinds of things that we're trying to push forward.
I would just add a couple of things. Clearly, DHS, is supporting a lot of women. I want to call out for this group in particular. The lack of access to quality childcare in this state is a tremendous barrier, and we have to do something about it. The governor included a proposal for tiered reimbursement in her budget this year for infant and toddlers. We have to move the needle on childcare so that women can work. So I'll start there. The only other thing I'll say is that then we have to think about how we look at quote unquote women's work. So the other side of the childcare conversation is what we're doing to support our childcare workforce, because that is predominantly women of color. And on the list of crazy things people say to me when you're the DHS director is you're told those jobs are worthless and we shouldn't be doing anything to support them. So we need to invest in that workforce because we need quality places for our kids to be left, and the people doing that work every day are the most amazing people you'd ever meet. So we need to support them and invest in them as a system. That will go a long way.
Great. So thank you all. You've stayed over your time, and I think we got to have some good questions asked and some good answers given, so we appreciate that. So one more round of applause for this panel.